What are you going to talk to us about, Clay?
Thank you, Mr. Gary Flower. That was Gary Flower. Does anybody know, other than he's got a funny English accent, know the history of Gary? I don't either. He just shows up at all the shows. He wrote a book back in the 70s, and he's been riding on the laurels of that forever. Unfortunately, I can't get him to actually do anything else other than, come to shows where, they help pay for the airfare, and he just kind of shows up and does these introductions with his hands out. But anyways, about the Pin Game Journal, it kind of hasn't been said that much, and Gary doesn't really say anything because he's good friends with what's his name, with Schellberg. I am, however, not really good friends with Schellberg. My motivation for the Pin Game Journal is that, much like you people, I am really fucking sick of not getting an issue for 6 months. And I live only like 10 miles from Schellberg. And I've been asking them for years. I said, look, Game Room Magazine comes out every month. Why can't the Pin Game Journal come out every month or every other month even, consistently? And he always came up with some wild ass excuses why it couldn't, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you need to let me help you, because if anything, Gary says I've only got 2 modes, off and WFO. Does everybody know what WFO means? Wide fucking open. Okay, so those are the only 2 modes I know, is like full on and full off. By the way, this show does have slight adult content, and my language is not all that appropriate. And are there any women in here? You should probably all leave. No, I'm just kidding. That's another story too. Like when I was at PPE last fall, which is another West Coast show in San Francisco. I did a similar thing. Well, actually, I did a video presentation of what we're doing using actual video footage. And Michael Sheese, the guy that runs the show, came up to me after the show and said, "Look, we don't want you to do video stuff. We want like a presentation." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? I got to do like a PowerPoint thing?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I go, like anybody can do a PowerPoint thing. Not everybody's going to do a video, but he's like, no. We don't want video. People want to see you speak. They don't want you to see some video, then stop and have you talk about it, then see some more video, stop and have you talk about it. We don't want that. We want, more talking points, talking heads, as it may be, a live one. I said, okay, I won't do that anymore. So you guys are, because of that, you get a fabulous PowerPoint presentation. I just learned how to use PowerPoint last week for this show. So there isn't any fancy animations or little sounds, I'll fart in the microphone. That's the best I can offer. Based on PowerPoint, because I don't know how to do it, and I'm not so sure I'd want to know how to do it anyways. But anyways, back to the Pin Game Journal, since I got sidetracked. So if I have anything to do with the Pin Game Journal from issue 131, which came out in June, which would be this month, forward to the end of the year, I'm going to make Pin Game Journal come out every month for the rest of the year. Now, yeah, you applaud and I'm applauding too. Now, the only holdup to that is Jim Schellberg. He's the publisher. He's like the hardest guy to deal with in the world when it comes to the Pin Game Journal, because it's his baby, and he kind of feels like I'm encroaching on it and kind of stealing it. Wouldn't you say, Gary, that's probably accurate? I'm saying nothing. He's saying nothing, but he's nodding up and down. You hear him? You hear him nod? Okay, so that's my thing. And like the next issue, I've already done it and delivered it in full resolution to Jim Schellberg, but he won't put it out because he wants to put his issue out next, that the one he's been working on for 6 months. Like I do them in like 2 weeks or a week, and it takes him 6 months, but that's a whole nother story. So, anytime there's a snafu, it's always, it seems like it's always Jim. So all I'm doing is I'm telling you that I'm responsible for certain issues, and if you got me doing it, it's going to come right out. And if you don't like those issues, shut the hell up. No, I'm just kidding. If you don't like those issues, you should tell Schellberg. If you do like them and you like the more timeliness of them, you should also tell Schellberg, because he needs encouragement to maintain this this schedule frenzy, as it may be, because he wants to deliver 8 issues a year, and this is only the last one I did would only be the second issue this year, and we're already halfway through the year. So in order to make that 8 issues a year, we got to crank one every month from here out to December. So anyways, that's what I'm trying to hit. I know this is way more than you probably wanted to hear about the Pin Game Journal, but like it or not, it's the only pinball magazine we have. I mean, we've got Game Room magazine, which is a nice magazine, but it's not all pinball, but it's still a nice magazine, and I don't discourage anybody from subscribing to it. You should subscribe to both magazines, just as, just because it's all we got, and I just don't want to see these things dead and buried, either one of them. And I don't think either one of them have amazing readership that to support them to any great extent. I mean, you can't go to Borders and find either of those magazines. Right? Has anybody seen Game Room even at Borders? I don't think so. I think that the subscription numbers are fairly low. Though this is top secret, it's probably like 2,500 for Game Room and maybe half that for the Pin Game. So, it's not huge numbers, and there's no big financial incentive to do any of this stuff. I'm not compensated at all for any of the Pin Game Journal stuff. Gary, who helps out a lot, is not compensated at all. Schellberg probably, if he was doing it from a profit center point of view, he would clearly be losing money, especially the way he handles it. So, the fact that you've got 3 goofballs that don't care about money and are willing to do it, any support you can provide would be great. But anyways, on with that. I want to talk about 70s EM restoration. I know a lot of people here aren't really so much into EMs, that solid states seem to be the thing. I hear people talking, I'm kind of a dot matrix guy. Why do I care about EMs? Well, I kind of started out as a dot matrix guy. When I started to get into pinball, it was when dot matrix were out. And I guess, the Addams Family and Jurassic Park and those games from the Funhouse from 90 to 94 did kind of suck me into pinball, and probably sucked a lot of you people into pinball too. But as your horizons widen, you find other things about pinball that you like, and one of the things I like are EMs. And I think if you really want to have a true understanding of pinball, that you need to look at all eras of pinball. From the anything post-World War II, that is, not post-Vietnam or post-Persian Gulf War, post-World War II. And I think if you see these games and you play them and you work on them and you restore them, that you get a greater understanding and for what they were doing back then and what they're doing now, and why things are the way they are. But anyways, my latest thrill has been 70s EM games. And in particular, I just bought this thing. It's a Gottlieb Hot Shots. It's from 1973. Now, a lot of people will say, well, what do I want a multiplayer for? A lot of hardcore collectors will say, what do I want a multiplayer for? Which this clearly is. It's a 4-player game. A lot of people are wedge head freaks. And a lot of people are like, well, what's a wedge head and what's a 4-player game? What's a 2-player game? What's the difference and why do I care? Well, true hardcore collectors tend to gravitate towards single-player games, because the rule set can be wider. That is, there can be more to get done and more to accomplish in a given period of time, or a given game length of 3 or 5 balls. Because on these games, there's essentially only mechanical memory, meaning that if you set the game up for same player shoots again, or a replay, when you drain the ball, everything resets just like it was the start of the game. And the reason they do that is because there's no way to have memory between players. It's not a digital game. There's very little mechanical memory. Mechanical memory would be like a stepper unit, an actual mechanical hardware device, not a piece of RAM. So they really don't have any of that. And that's why a lot of hardcore pinball guys that like 70s and 60s EMs, gravitate towards single-player games, because then the game doesn't really have to remember anything between players, because there's only one player, and it doesn't even really have to remember much between balls unless it wants to, because again, it's all in one game, in that mechanical memory thing again. But the thing I like about multiplayers, particularly these Gottlieb ones, is that they're cheap. They're really cheap. I mean, you can get a multiplayer Gottlieb. I bought this one at Allentown for $500, and this is just the way I received it too. you can see it's relatively clean. It's got new rubber on it. It actually worked. Well, kind of worked. Worked enough that most people would be okay with it. And it was kind of neat. But the other thing that's cool about the Gottlieb stuff is drop targets. Drop targets are basically mechanical animation that you actually hit with the ball. And people always like drop target games. Even today, what's the Stern game that just came out, Gary? That had the crap load of drop targets. World Poker Tour. Isn't it World Poker Tour? Yeah, World Poker Tour. Yeah, well, whatever. But I mean, it's got like more drop targets than any game had in like 10 years. And maybe that isn't a great title, but most people that play it really like it because of the number of drop targets it has. So here you've got a game that's 35 years before that, and it's got 14 two banks of 7 drop targets, 14 drop targets. That's a shitload of drop targets. I mean, that's a lot of crap to hit, and it's fun to hit them. It's fun to break them. I love breaking drop targets. I challenge all my friends to break all my drop targets. Come by and break my drop targets. I like replacing them. I have nothing better to do. No, not really. Now, the other thing that's neat about the 70s games is 3-inch flippers. So you've got this double-headed combination of 3-inch flippers and drop targets. And now you're saying 3-inch flippers, who cares? Don't all games have 3-inch flippers? Well, prior to 1971, Gottlieb was using 2-inch flippers. And if you go back statistically and look at the number of games that were produced by Gottlieb, EM games from 1979, post-war to 1979, I think it's like over 80% are 2-inch flipper games. Okay, now if you've played a 2-inch flipper game, it's a completely different style of play. It's much harder to control the ball, and most people, frankly, that are light to moderately into pinball don't like 2-inch flipper games. Okay, they like 3-inch, which 3-inch is the same size it's on any of the new Sterns or the new Williams, or basically anything from 1971 on is going to have 3-inch flippers. So you've got this double-headed combo of massive drop targets and 3-inch flippers, but the problem is that you've only got this era from 1971 to 1979 that represent these games. It's a fairly short time span, and it was also during an era where they just weren't kicking out titles like they were in the 50s and the 60s. So here's like my favorite list of 70s multiplayer drop target EMs that are good and cheap. Good and cheap, I mean you can get most of these games for the $100 to $800 range. Maybe the ones on the lower part of the list with the asterisks off of them, those ones are maybe exceptions to that rule that you would have to pay a little bit more for, like a EM Joker Poker. That would kind of be hard to find. The Sinbad Eye of the Tiger. These were crossover games that came out at the same time as System 1 solid state games, but they also made an EM format. So those are more rare and probably a bit harder to find. But all these other games, Across the Top, Target Alpha, Solar City, Canada Dry, that game was so popular they used it in 3 different multiplayer formats and then also in 2 single-player formats. And that had 15 drop targets. That's a crap load of drop targets. The Hot Shots, Big Shots, which is the 4 and the 2-player variant of the game we were just looking at, the Sheriff Lawman, Jack in the Box. Now, the one thing about all these games is that it's just fun to bash on these games. It's like shallow fun. It's like having sex when you were back in high school and college with, your favorite girl. It was just meaningless fun. Unlike sex you might have with your wife today, that's far more complicated. So it kind of brings back that, that very, like all I got to do is knock down the targets. Yeah, some of the games represent a slight, maybe a challenge where you have to knock them down in order. So a lot of the single players could conventionally be that, like Jack's Open or something like that. But for the most part, these games are all just bang on the drop targets. And you can see there's a fair number of games, but again, if you look at the number of games and compare it to all the other games back in the 50s and 60s, this is a dwarf list compared to the number of titles that were available. But the good thing is that the production numbers on these games was very, very high, which means that they're readily available. Also, 70s games are obviously newer than 60s and 50s, and the survival rate, which they say as by decade goes down by about half, means that these games are out there available at garage sales and Mr. Pinball Classified and in your local retailers, for fairly reasonable prices. So this is stuff that I've been looking for, and I've kind of been jumping on now that the economy is in the crapper. It's a great time to buy games. At least that's what you need to tell your wife. Okay, that works great. I mean, honey, it's only $300. Yeah, but we need to eat this week. Do you mind? You know, and no, I don't mind. You can eat. I'm not gonna. You know. So, anyways, why 70s Gottliebs? Excellent gameplay, rules and features. Drop Target City. Good artwork. The Gottlieb artwork is far superior to the Williams artwork, which we'll come to in just a second. Excellent mechanical mechs, meaning that Gottlieb stuff is made kind of like a tank. 3-inch flippers, and Ed Krinsky was the designer and the guy that did most of the 70s games, and he really was the king of the drop target. Why not Williams? I get these people that are Williams heads. I hate Williams 70s games. I just despise them. The artwork I just can't deal with. The pointy artwork, the 70s pinks and greens, it just makes me freaking ill. Chunky gameplay, the games just don't feel right. The flippers don't have a very good feel to them on Williams games. What few games that they use drop targets in, they're very odd feeling. Like, has anybody played Grand Prix? It's only got a couple drop targets in it, but when you hit them, they go down like they've been dipped in dog shit, and it just doesn't have a very good feel to it. Game rules on Williams games, you know, I don't know, was this designed for the morons or something? Who the hell did Jubilee? I just want to kill that guy. Very few games do have drop targets that are Williams. The mechanical assemblies are not nearly as durable, and I'm sorry, I just don't like Kordak. If he puts another fucking swinging target on a game, I'm just gonna, I know he's like 100 years old now, I just want to kill the guy. That feature came out like in what, 1962 or something like that, and he used it all the way up the space mission. I'm like, God, just stop it. Now, what about Bally's? Bally's kind of like a compromise between the two brands. I like Bally's. I think they're cool. But, you know, the artwork's great. You got Dave Christensen. He did great with the artwork. It's probably better than Gottlieb artwork, you know, if it's Dave art. But the number of game titles that Bally put out was much smaller than the other manufacturers. They just I mean, when they made a game, they made a shitload of them. I mean, Captain Fantastic. Didn't that break like statistical records at the time for sales? Wizard did. Wizard, same thing. But the problem I have with these games is that they just, to me, seem largely overrated. Like Captain Fantastic's the perfect example. I mean, who here plays Captain Fantastic and really just thinks it's great gameplay? Forget the art, just great gameplay. I'm not seeing any hands. I know I kind of set you up there. If somebody raised their hand, they'd be like, ah, there's that idiot that raised his hand. So maybe that was a rhetoric question. But anyways, I just, there isn't a lot of Bally titles, and I don't like the design so much. I like the artwork. I think they're real pretty to look at. I mean, the Wizard backlash just rots. Anne Margaret looks great on that thing. I mean, and the two girls on the other side of Anne. I mean, hot babes. It's a great game. But and the play just doesn't do anything. What's up with those flags? Is that just a way to suck up playfield space? Is that what that is? I don't know. Ted Zale, to me, was the design god of Bally, and he pretty much went the way of the dodo bird when 3-inch flippers came out, unfortunately. But he's the man, but he didn't quite make it into the 70s. And also the mechanical assemblies just aren't as good as the Gottliebs. A lot of stuff wears out, especially drop target assemblies on Bally's. Really like to wear out. It's hard to bring them back up where that they feel good. But anyways, enough of my gyrating about that. Look, you can fix a game too. You can do this. Okay, so a lot of people say, you know, I'm not, you know, capable of fixing, you know, 70s EM games are complicated. There's a lot of crap going on in these multiplayers, but I'm telling you, you can do it. By the way, she was a former Playboy model well, that's another story. Forget it. Okay, so the first thing I do when I get one of these games is I work on the head. And in particular, I just start with the connectors. These are the connectors that connect the head to the bottom board. I just like to wire brush them real quick. I don't put a lot of time into this. By the way, the focus of this is that, say you get a Gottlieb EM and you just, a multiplayer, and you just want to get the damn thing running. This isn't like a meticulous restoration of it, but you just want to like play the thing. Because the one thing that's bad about multiplayers is there's a lot of crap going on. I mean, in order for the game to manage playing 4 players or even 2 players, There's a lot of shit built into the game to do that, and that just means they're a lot more complicated to go through than, say, a single-player game, or even any of the older games. So I always do the connectors. I always wire brush the male pins on those. The next thing we got to look at is the player unit. This thing right in the dead center. Let's see. This has a laser. That thing right there. This is the player unit. Okay, so basically what this is Gottlieb's sick idea that we're going to take 2 units and make them 1. So where Bally and Williams had like a coin unit and a ball unit, Gottlieb felt that, hell, we don't need to do it that way. We can put it all into 1 unit just to make repair that much sicker. And it is. It's a lot harder to deal with, not so much from this angle, but this thing is kind of a bitch to work on because of this crap right here, all these little switch stacks. So you've got basically on a 4-player game, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 for each player. If this was a 2-player game, you'd have 1, 2, and then these 2 would be used for resetting the score reels on player 1 and 2 on a 2-player game. But anyways, they still utilize this kind of hidden switches behind the player unit, and they're kind of a bitch to deal with because they're hard to get at, they're hard to adjust, and they're hard to clean. But you kind of got to do it if you want the game to work reliably. You kind of got to go through and make sure that the switches don't have a really wide gap. I like to gap my stuff on this fairly close, maybe about 1/8 of an inch at most. And run a flexstone through them just to make sure that everything gets transmitted through to the score reels, because what this unit is doing is as you score the ball around on the playfield, it goes through this unit, and this is what tells it to go to which set of the 4 score reels. Score reel set for player 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 1 and 2 if it was a 2-player game. Okay. Then the next thing is I run some 400 grit over the over the brass rivets. That's these guys. Okay, and I clean it with some alcohol and a paper towel. But the one thing I don't do is take this unit apart. Okay, I'm taking a minimalistic approach here. The reason why I don't take it apart is because there is just a lot of shit here to screw up. And the less I got to take things apart, the less I have to worry about, did I put it back together right? And I just get really sick of second guessing myself because I'm not that smart to be able to remember everything. I have really bad short-term memory. I'm probably Alzheimer's, heading in that direction. So I just don't want to remember that shit. So this is a cool unit because this Bakelite disc is fairly small compared to the larger stationary Bakelite disc. I can just run some 400 grit over on this side, then advance the thing manually over, then do the top, and then do the bottom. I can do that all manually and then clean it up with some alcohol and a paper towel. And then I put a little of my famous Radio Shack, which actually you can't buy a Radio Shack anymore, the Teflon gel lube. You can get it at, I think, Harbor Freight, though. Just a thin coating, like right there, that one has been lubricated with it. You can see there isn't a lot on there. It's not like oozing off. It's just a thin coating. And that just helps everything kind of glide and slide. And that basically takes care of the player unit. And that's where a lot of problems are on these games, is the player unit. Okay, so next I go to the relay bank to the right of the player unit. So to give you a perspective, there's a player unit, and then I've got these set of relays here. And you're always going to see there's always going to be 3 sets of relays that are kind of segregated off by themselves, and they're the M, N, and L. Usually that's their designation. So those are going to be the 10, 100, and 1,000 point scoring. And I always like to go through these because there will always be one switch that actually moves the score reel, one that rings the chimes, one that's like an advance that advances. If it's a 10, it's got to advance the hundredths when it gets to the 9 position. And then there'll be a lock, usually that guy right there, that keeps the relay on until the score reel advances, which we'll come back to in a second. So I like to look at those switches and make sure they're all adjusted, make sure the switch stack is tight, as you tighten those 2 guys up, and make sure that they're adjusted properly. And then, after I'm done with those, I go to the relays to the right of them, and 2 of them are called, on a 4-player game, are called Z1 and Z2. And what these guys do is they reset the score reels. Now, on a 2-player game, we won't have Z1 and Z2, but if this is a 4-player, and I always want to look at these guys and make sure that they're nice and clean and got nice. And then I want to look at this guy that rides on top. You see how his switchblade is on the very top of that activator there? This guy is kind of a problem. He's a normally closed, and as that guy, actually I showed in the next one, as he energizes, he opens up. So that's real important that that switch is working, otherwise the game won't reset properly. So I just kind of go through those, and I don't spend an infinite amount of time on any of this stuff. I also want to look over here at all the solder joints. When I'm fumbling around with this thing, I want to make sure that none of these wires delaminate off the switchblade. Sometimes when they were soldering them on, the soldering irons weren't quite hot enough, and the solder joints actually delaminate right off the switchblade. So I always kind of like check to make sure that none of that happens. It's real common on Williams games too. Not so much Bally, but on Gottlieb and Williams. Okay, then I go to the credit unit. And I basically always want to make sure that this guy, I want to set him to free play. There's a switch right there that when you're in the 0 position, it opens up. Well, I kind of permanently close that guy so that way when I just press the button on the front of the game, it starts up without having to put a quarter in it or whatever. I also will come back to this, but you see there's a nice coil stop there and a nice coil stop right here. I might steal those and put them on my flipper coils. And the reason why is that these guys don't get a lot of usage, and if the coil stops are in bad, crappy condition, it doesn't really matter because this has a very limited use, where flippers have high use and they get wailed on a lot, so it's always nice to have good coil stops in your flippers. So if you want to like exchange them, take your crappy flipper coil stops and put them back here, and then take these good ones and put them on the flippers. That's not a bad idea. I personally don't always do it, but it's something to think about. Okay, then here's the next little thing called the AS relay. This was something Gottlieb came up with. They used to have a match relay, or a match stepper unit that was this big honking 4-inch diameter thing. Well, back in the day, they kind of thought this is expensive just to give people a match. So we came up with this little relay that has these little fingers that spin around here. Well, this has to work reliably, not so much because you care about the match, which I know most of you probably don't, but this guy right here, there's a little alternating switch that closes and opens, closes and opens, closes and opens, which is like an alternating feature on the playfield. If the ball hits a slingshot, maybe it lights the left side, and then it hits slingshot and lights the right side. Well, something's causing that to alternate on and off, on and off. And it's usually like a little top-mounted switch on the AS relay. Now, that isn't always the case. There isn't always a switch there, but it's something to look at. But what I do is I take my finger and I flip this guy down, and I just kind of make sure that this unit is working. Clean up these plates with a little bit of 400 grit and put a little gel lube on them. Basically make sure that everything works. If I'm really can't get this guy working right, I might cut a couple little coils off this return spring to kind of increase the tension a bit. And I also sometimes just make sure if you bend this guy out a little bit, these friction plates, sometimes it puts a little less resistance on this rotating part here, and that can help make this guy advance. The other thing is this activator plate has a large piece of plastic on the other side of it, and sometimes the plastic with time, it's made out of nylon, warps. So sometimes if you buy a new activator plate with the little piece of nylon on it, they're cheap. They're only a couple bucks from Pinball Resource. You can buy those, and sometimes that really helps too. But I always want to make sure this unit's working. Now, why aren't we talking about score reels? Because Tim Mee is here. That's why, and he does a really nice presentation on score reels. No, seriously, I'm not going to touch the score reels. There's fucking 16 of these bastards in this thing, and it's like the last thing I want to do. Mostly because there's a real easy way to test if score reels are good or not, and I don't want to deal with them. They give me a headache. They're a lot of work. They're easy to screw up. It's a big fucking time suck, and I just want to play my damn game. I don't want to work on the score reels. No, really, the score reels do take a lot of abuse, but I'm just not going to look at them at this time. And besides, maybe Tim Mee will give that presentation he gave at PPE on score reels. He'll tell you all about it. It's a really nice presentation, but I just leave them to dead last, and I'll show you why in a minute. All right, now on to the bottom panel. She's got a nice bottom panel. I like her. All right, so to open it, you got to open up the hood and open up the playfield. You can work on it like this with the playfield up, but at this point, I tend to remove the bottom panel from the game. Or not the bottom panel, the playfield. Just get it the hell out of there because it kind of just gets in the way. So usually there's just a couple connectors here, and then there's one mounted in the back, and then you can lift the whole playfield out and get it out of your way. And then once it's out, you can look at the bottom panel. Gottlieb's, you can take the bottom panel out of the game too. So you can take the playfield out and the bottom panel out if you want. I don't tend to do that because there's just too much stuff I got to unbolt to make it happen. I mean, there's a bolt there, and there's one usually around here, probably down there somewhere. It's probably blocked by this wiring harness. And you could pull this guy out, but then you got to worry about the tilt assembly, and all the wires have to disconnect from the chime units, and they got to disconnect from the flippers, and I don't know. It's just more stuff that I want to have to remember to put back. So I'll have the thing on like a pin cart, and I'll just jack the pin cart up all the way. And with the playfield out, this is up high enough for me that I'm not killing my back, and that's how I work on it. This game has a reset bank. They stopped using this around 1975 with fast draw, but a lot of games have it. And basically, this is where like the start relay resides, and you can see the nice little sticker here that explains. Hopefully, it's in your game that explains what everything is. If it's loose, I usually use some 3M number 77 glue to kind of glue it back down because it's nice to know what all those relays are. But I like to look at each one of like where the wires go here because you'll get that wire delamination from the switches. I like to look at that every once in a while. These little jumper wires, see all these jumper wires? Here's a yellow or a green one, yellow one, some red ones. Sometimes if something locks on, those can burn up and cause a short. So I like to just kind of give it a visual inspection. But then you can loosen up these guys, these two little wing nuts, and this whole thing will kind of flip up. Okay, and then you can kind of look at the switches some more, and you can manually take your finger and press on the activator plate. It'll drop this guy down, and you can look at the switch closures and make sure that each one of the switches is making good contact, open and closed as it should. Maybe doing a little over-wiping. Over-wiping means you just don't want the two switches to line up like this. You actually want them to kind of go like this against each other. And the reason you want them to do that is it's almost like a self-cleaning action. So if you can do that, you get much more reliable action. And then when you flip this unit back down, just make sure that these wing nuts, you can see how it's like round there, and it's like round on the front edge here. Those two round areas should line up perfectly, and then you can tighten the guys back up. So I like to look at that. Sometimes there's also some sick switch that's mounted like under here on some of them that you didn't even know was there. And you look at the schematics and you're like, what is that switch? Where is it? And you'll spend like 3 days looking for it. But it's like under here sometimes. It doesn't cause a lot of problems, but it's a sick little puppy. And again, I don't pay it much mind unless it's actually causing me problems. Like I can't get the damn game to work. I can't get a good restart. I'll look for that switch. I don't have a picture of it. I wasn't smart enough to take a picture of it when I was doing this. But that's also another guy to consider. Then I move on to the score motor, and I like to always look at the score motor switches in particular that have big-ass tungsten contacts. Like here are little-ass ones. These are big-ass ones. And the big-ass ones smell more than the little-ass ones. That was a joke. You're all supposed to laugh. No, these ones are passing more current, and I like them to be nice and tight. Okay, so I like the switch contacts to be tight. I don't want a big-ass gap. I want a little-ass gap. And these ones up here, it isn't so important, except maybe for that switch right there, which is known as the home switch. What the home switch does is, you see these indentations right there, there's 3 of them in a 360-degree rotation. So every 120 degrees this rotates. This little finger moves against this here, and it keeps the motor running until it completes and comes to the next indentation here. And then the home switch opens up, and that's how the motor stops and starts at these 3 indentations in the 360-degree turn. So the home switch takes a lot of abuse. I like to make sure that that's tightly gapped, and I'll probably either run a flex dome between it to clean them. And I might even clean these guys. The reason why these guys are so big are these are the guys that handle actually resetting all the score reels. So they pass a fair amount of current, and they do like to get dirty. There's also usually one right here that's responsible for like 500 or 300 point scoring. Again, it's got a big ass contact on it too. If it's got a big ass contact on it, that means that it's running big ass current, which means that it's probably getting dirty and needs nicely adjusted. Or maybe you'll hit like 500 points and you only get 200 points instead of 500 and be wondering why. It's because that switch is maybe dirty or misgapped. So I'll look at all those things. You can flip this guy up too for easy access, so you can look underneath here. Also, you see all these little nylon guys here. Just make sure that none of those have fallen out. They like to fall out every once in a while. They're kind of pressed into the switch blades. So if one falls out, it may not be obvious, but it will not make something work. It'll cause you some kind of headache. So I always like to look at that. A visual inspection on EMs is really cool because like in solid state games, everything is black boxed, which means like, you've got a logic chip. So something goes in and something comes out, but you can't see what it does inside that unless you're using an oscilloscope. And even if you're using an oscilloscope, you're looking at it going like, what the fuck is that doing? You know what I mean? What's that line signature doing? So EMs aren't like that. EMs are really cool because you can actually see the black box. You can see the insides. You can actually see the switch opening and closing. And, sometimes, like I was just working on a game for a guy. This guy called me up. It was a Bally game. And every once in a while, the 1,000-point score reel would lock on and it wouldn't release. And what happened is, like one of the solder joints, it had a jumper that ran like a solid metal jumper that ran through a bunch of switch contacts. And where it soldered around that solid jumper, it had cracked. The solder joint had cracked. And the way I found it was really cool. I turned off the lights in the room and played the game. I had him play the game while I was watching the back box. And I could see this tiny little spark like right there. Like, you're used to seeing the sparks across the switches, but I could see this tiny little blue spark right there, and I knew, okay, we got an intermittent connection here, and then I just soldered it up, and the game was fixed. So that's the light off test. That works really neat, like when you're fixing EMs, the light off test. Okay, then after on the bottom panel, I go through, I look at each relay. I like to look at each one, again, for delaminated solder joints, delaminating off here. I also like to look at the adjustment here, make sure everything has a nice wiping motion and that everything moves nicely. Tighten up these guys. That's the switch stack. They call it that because look, it's a big stack. It's like a bake like shit sandwich with metal as the meat. Boy, that's gonna be tasty. But anyways, you tighten those guys up. Another thing, when you're using your big fat finger to move this activator plate, be careful that you don't knock the blades out of the activator plate. A lot of people do that because they got 2 thumbs and okay, they got 10 thumbs. And the way I like to activate these relays is to pull down on this little nib here, opposed to pushing on this. Because when you push on this, you tend to bring this thing forward, which knocks the blades out. And if you've done that once or twice or 5 times, you really start to hate yourself for doing it. So I push down here instead, and it kind of helps prevent that. Also, sometimes if something locks on the playfield or in a relay, associated relay is locked on, the switch blades can get so hot that they'll actually melt this nylon. I like to look for stuff like that too, because that is obviously going to, if this burns, it'll stick to the switch blade and then the whole relay basically won't work. So, that's a good thing to look for too, is stuff like that. When I'm done looking at all the relays on the bottom panel, I go to the chime box. I don't like to spend eons on this, but to me it's important to have good sounding chimes. So you just undo these two nuts right here, and you can take off these aluminum plates. On Williams games in particular, the nylon tip sometimes likes to break off the plunger. The plunger goes up through here, and then this part contacts, right about here. Well, I've seen them where there's actually holes in the nylon because the nylon, or holes in the aluminum plate because the nylon tip broke off and you got metal to metal. If you need to make a new one of these, you can just go down to Home Depot and they just sell like aluminum bar stock, and you just cut it to the same length and drill 2 holes in it and you're good to go. if you need a new one. Another thing too, if you're like a really perfectionist, you can like take these things off and polish them on like a polisher. You know, you put them in your berry polisher, and then you put them on a wheel and make them all nice and slick looking. It doesn't do shit for the sound, but it looks neat. You know, somebody raises the hood, hey, look, he polished the chime bars. Isn't that really neat? No, that was a fucking waste of time. Why did I do that? But anyways, the plunger, you can see this one. You see how it's got like its ass is like needs to be wiped. It's got black crap on it. Okay, now the reason why that happens is because this game was like sitting forever, and they've got this weather strip that goes across the bottom of the chime unit right there. You can see it in the blue arrow. That sticks. I'm wearing out my laser thing. That sticks to there, and sometimes the chimes won't work because this is actually physically stuck to that. So I like to put just scrape that up with a screwdriver and put a new piece of weather stripping in there. Otherwise, when the chime goes, the plunger goes up, it hits the chime, you get the dong, and then it falls back down, and this part hits here, and then you get a dong. So you get a doing, doing. And it sounds really stupid. It's a real metallic sound. So if you put a new weather strip there, it'll sound a lot better. Also, if these guys wear out, and they like to rip, you can buy new ones at Pinball Resource. They're really cheap. I suggest you just keep them around. But that's all I do to that. Clean this guy up too, because he likes to get dirty. And then maybe put Q-tip through the coil sleeve and clean that up a little bit. And then you can do the same type of thing to the knocker. Usually though, the knocker likes to break the tip off. It's got the same style of plunger. It likes to break the tip off because it's hitting this immovable bar opposed to this guy hitting these somewhat movable bars. Also, this is steel and these are aluminum, so these give a little more and this doesn't give it all. But luckily, this doesn't go off as much, only when you win games, so these usually don't break. But, you know, you're there. You might as well look at it. Why not? Okay, now, a lot of people say, do you use high tap? And I do tend to use high tap. I like it. What high tap does is it increases the voltage from the transformer to all the solenoids and only the solenoids. It doesn't increase the voltage to the lamps, just to the solenoids. So most Gottliebs are usually 28 or 29 volts. When you put them on high tap, it goes up to 30 or 31 volts. And high tap was originally designed before we had all this computer crap running our electric systems back in the summer, back in the 70s, you know, when everybody was running fans and just buying air conditioning. Sometimes the wall voltage, instead of being 115 volts, it would drop down to 105 volts. So the operators would move from this contact to this contact on the transformer to make the games a little peppier to compensate for the lower voltage. Well, even though we don't have those issues today, this cheat will give you just a little bit more power to the game. Now, a lot of people don't like that because it gives everything a little bit more power. It doesn't just make 2 more volts to your flippers or your slingshots or your pop bumpers, but it also makes your stepper units and your relay coils and everything run at 2 more volts. So some people are critical of doing that because it does stress everything, but in my opinion, the Gottlieb stuff is made to more than compensate for that. And you know, you're not going to beat the shit out of your games because you got them on high tap. You know, from that point of view, you might beat the shit out of your games because you know the flippers are a little stronger and you're breaking drop targets. But you know, I'm a big fan of breaking drop targets, so I don't have anything better to do than change those. So, anyways, I like high tap. That's just me. Okay, now we're going to do some Playfield work, and here we have another girl. Look, if she's doing it, you can do it, right? Sure, you can. Okay, so now we got to do the Playfield. Flip the Playfield back into the game. At this point, don't do the connectors. I mean, don't attach the connectors, but you can run a wire brush over them. I like to run a wire brush over the male connector pins, but don't hook them up just yet. I like to look at the stepper units under the Playfield on Gottlieb's. If it's got some sort of a bonus, it's going to have a stepper unit. This is on the Hot Shots. This does a scan to give you 1,000 points for each one of the down drop targets. So it's got like 14 or 15 positions that it goes through and checks for each one of the associated drop targets to see if it's down. This is just a step up unit, meaning it has just one coil. It's not a step up, step down. Step up, step down means that it could go up, and then when you get your bonus, it ratchets down, you know, clink, 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 clink. On this guy, it's always all just going in one direction. So this guy is, you have to kind of take apart to get at. You see these brass rivets here? You can't really access them because you got maybe 3/8 of an inch between that plate and this plate. My fingers are too fat, so I got to take this guy off. So what I do when I take him off is I mark some things. I put like a little Sharpie and mark right there. That's the rivet that this finger is lining up to. Put a mark on here, you know, just to make sure that that finger lines up to there. And then I usually take another Sharpie and just kind of run a line across there to give me kind of a general idea when I put everything back together that I'm putting it back in the right place. Now on step-ups, it's not such a huge deal. That is, you know, you can kind of screw this up putting it back together and it doesn't really matter because again, we only have one coil and it only goes in one direction and it kind of fixes itself if you want to look at it that way. But on step-up, step-downs, you're going to have to mark this shit. Otherwise, when the bonus unit is degraded down to nothing, on most Gottliebs, that's 0 points. If you have it positioned wrong, maybe when it's degraded down to its reset position, it'll give you 1,000 points instead of 0 points. So you want to have this adjusted right. And if you got it marked, it kind of takes the, you know, the idiocy out of the whole thing. So, you know, mark it, and then just like we did with the player unit, you know, clean these with 400 and a little gel lube and some alcohol and all that kind of stuff like we talked about before, not to be too redundant. I talked about all that stuff. Okay, then after I go through that, I figure you got to also look at the relays that are mounted underneath the playfield, just like we did on the bottom board relays, same deal. Tighten these guys, look for delaminate wires, look for contacts, switch contacts. Every once in a while, the switch contact will fall out of the blades. Not too often, but it happens. Sometimes you got to solder a new one in. You can buy new switch contacts from Steve Young, put them in there, and you know, just check all those out and make sure they're all adjusted nice. Okay, so now we're going to turn her over for easy access. That's what I always tell my wife. And flip her upside down like that. Time to flip the playfield upside down and lay it across side rails. This is why I have not attached the connectors in the bottom of the game. It makes it a lot easier to fix all the playfield controlled lamp sockets. The one thing I really have a pet peeve for is lamp sockets that flicker, or that the lamps look dim, or lamp sockets or lamps that don't work at all. And then you go in there and you fiddle fuck with them and they come on. I hate that. That really bothers me. So I just flip this thing upside down. And then I do the Tim Arnold methodology. Instead of replacing the lamp sockets because there's too damn many of them and it'd be too expensive, and there's too many varieties of them, you can fix them. So what you do is you take some 150 grit sandpaper, you sand this edge, and then you take, you know, a 25 watt or 35 watt soldering iron, heat that crap up and put a little solder drip, you know, from, because you can see the wire comes in here, goes up here, electricity's coming through here, and then it's got to get to here. Well, look, between there and there, these things weren't soldered together by the factory. Okay, the way this worked back in the 70s when these things were brand new, this piece was separate, this piece was separate, the tit was separate, and the little finger here that the wire solders to was separate. And then there's a little fiber guy right here that's in between them as an insulator. And then they would just press this all together like it's a big rivet. But with time, the fiber guy shrinks. Okay, so when this shrinks, all this crap gets loose. And as it gets loose, you ever do that thing in science where you take a 6-volt battery and you hook it up to 2 pieces of metal, you drop it in some water, and it separates the molecules of the water between hydrogen in one tube and oxygen in another? Did anybody ever do that? Well, this is the same type of thing, kind of. You got electricity going through it, you got 6 volts going through it, you got a humid environment. Here, you guys are in Seattle. God, could it get any more humid? Okay, so that's your water. So then what happens? All this shit corrodes. You know, these were zinc plated. And all that white kind of crap that you see on all the metal parts, that's the zinc, like, deteriorating. So basically you're losing all the corrosive forces. Then this guy loosens up, which means that the connection between this and this is loose, and that is loose. Everything kind of loosens up. So what you do is you sand that, you solder that, you take the wire off hand, or you sand the tit, you solder that guy right to there, and your lamp sockets, like, I'd say 98% of the time, this fixes this style of lamp socket and you don't have to replace it, which is nice because there's a bazillion of them and it's just more money. And also take a Q-tip and clean that dirt out. I need to do that there. And then you'll have some lamp sockets, same deal, that may be mounted on a metal bar, okay? And I do the same type of thing. You know, same thing, sand and solder. Same thing with the tits too. Sand and solder. Move the wires over. Makes everything work better. Then you don't get those flickering lights. Then I look at the pop bumpers. There's supposed to be 2 switch blades here. You see how there's 2 switch blades here? This is the guy that the finger goes through, the ball hits the skirt, then the penis on the skirt hits this guy that closes that, then that goes over here and turns on the relay for the pop bumper. The relay pulls this guy in. This guy comes up that way, and then it's supposed to open up this switch right here, okay, which then turns this relay off. That's how it's supposed to work. The switchblade breaks, the pop bumper's still going to work, okay? But you won't get as good pops. They won't be as strong because it's going to be dictated by how long the ball is closing this switch. It's going to dictate how hard and fast and far this plunger pulls in. Where in a working system, even a light ball hit against this guy is going to give you a full thrust on the pop bumper because it's looking to open this switch to release that relay. So when you have this broken blade, yes, the game will still work, but your pop bumpers may not be as strong as they should be. So, you know, I'm a big fan of nice, strong pop bumpers. So we take this switch out, you unbolt it right here, there's 2 screws, you take it out, and then you can undo these guys here, and you can buy a new switchblade from Pinball Resource. And then you put a new tungsten contact right in there, and then you solder it right to the blade. Some guys will hammer it, kind of press it. I like to solder it. It just removes all idiocy from the plan. And then the switchblade's going to be too long, so you just kind of cut it off. Okay? And then I look at the other parts. These are supposed to be sharp, not rounded like that. Look, that's both rounded. Look at that. That's really bad. That's really worn. And then here, see how this guy, it's cupped out? That's all worn, and it's cupped out here. You can basically buy, I think this is like $1, and these are like 50 cents from Pinball Resource. If you were really cheap, though, you can actually turn the fiber plate over and reuse the other side. But the bad part about that is then it's forcing against here, and it's just going to break. So I would say replace this. But so you got to buy a new one of these, new one of these, and new one of those. And a new coil sleeve, which isn't shown in this picture. Okay, so then here we put it all back together. So I got a new coil sleeve in here, I got a new one of them, the yoke parts, the fiber yoke, the metal yoke, a new switchblade with a new switch contact. So when this guy pulls up, you see these are normally closed right now. When this guy energizes, that guy pulls up, it opens up that switch contact, which releases that pop bumper relay up here. It gives me nice strong pops. Okay, and then on the slingshots, you don't, see now slingshots work kind of like pop bumpers don't. That is, they're only closed for as long as the ball is actually closing the playfield switch for. So these guys don't tend to be as forceful as they could be. That's why you get a hit on the slingshot. Sometimes it'll kick the ball all over hell, and sometimes it's just kind of like this limp, like a girl throwing left-handed, you know, throwing a baseball left-handed. And that's why, is because they're not using a relay for the slingshots. But anyways, oops, don't look at her yet. Anyways, this guy right here is the scoring switch. So when this guy pulls in, the scoring switch closes. That's why sometimes the pop bumpers kick and you don't get any scoring. You want a pretty tight gap on this, probably 1/8 of an inch. That way you get good scoring even on light hits. And put a new coil sleeve in here while you're at it too. Maybe a drop of oil right there. Isn't a bad idea either. Okay, back to my girl. Okay, now it's time for the flippers. She looks good. I like her. All right, so flippers. We got to rebuild the flippers. Here's the really cheap and maybe not so easy way to do it. The flipper, we're looking at the bottom of the playfield here. This is called the flipper bushing. This is made out of nylon. You're going to buy a new one of these eventually. I don't have a new one here, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And then the flipper itself comes through the playfield, and there's a little shaft that comes through here. That shaft goes through this hole. Then you got this screw and another one up here that you tighten. That tightens the paw, which is this assembly here, to the shaft, the paw to the shaft to the paw. And then I've got the coil stop up here, which is this thing right here, which is what the plunger, this little thing right here, ass end beats into there. And now if this guy's really beat, again, you can swap it with the ones on the credit unit. If it's not beat, you can rework it. Either way, it's up to you. But if you want, what happens here is this roll pin and this roll pin are metal on this fiber link, and you get elongation in the holes in the fiber, and that causes play in here. And then you'll get these guys right here, it'll mushroom, so you get like a little rough edge right across there, which means that the plunger doesn't move as well inside the coil sleeve, which is a bad thing, because that's like resistance. So we don't want resistance. We want this thing to work as well as possible because we want our flippers to be really good and strong. Okay, so the next thing we do is, here I am, that's the coil stop. It's kind of a crappy picture, but that's the coil stop, and this is my big fat hand. and this is a file, and I'm actually filing this edge flat, even though it doesn't look like I am. And then after I file it nice and flat, I like to chafer the edge. You can also do it on a belt or on a grinder, but it's probably better to do it by hand. Then I take a punch. That's this guy here. I hit it with a hammer, which would be up here, and I knock these roll pins out. Do not knock the roll pins all the way through, though. Make sure that you see you got a piece of metal here and you got a piece of metal there and you got the Bakelite link here. Just knock them through enough to get the Bakelite link off. If you knock them out, you're going to be hating yourself in just a minute. And then also there's another roll pin back here that takes the plunger off the fiber link. Okay. And then here's the plunger with the link that would normally be right here, and there's the roll pin that I didn't knock all the way out, and I can run it against the side of my bench grinder, not the face, the side, because the side is nice and flat. It'll give you a nice flat radius on that thing, because it is probably mushroomed. Or if you're not too cheap, you can just buy a whole new plunger and a new fiber link. But what fun would that be? Then over here, I got a nice wire wheel. I wire wheel these parts, both the coil stop and the plunger. I don't really know why I do that. It just looks really cool after you do it. Yeah, that's it. It cleans the burrs off. Yeah. But it looks really cool, is the way I like it. Fuck the burrs. I just like how it looks. So I wire wheel them for no particular reason, or cleaning the burrs off, yeah. Then I make a new link. Okay, so you see this right here? This is just raw Bakelite. You can get this crap from Pinball Resource, even though the stuff that Pinball Resource sells I think is too thick. It's a little thick, but it still works good. And then I just took that thing and traced it on there, and then I take it to a bandsaw and I cut it out. And then after I cut it out, I drill the 2 holes in it. In this case, they're kind of 1/8-inch holes. It's actually not quite 1/8-inch. You kind of got to work the drill around a little bit because it's actually a little bigger than 1/8-inch. And then I put them on the end of that roll pin that's sticking through the plunger just to make sure that they move freely, but they don't have any play. Because if they don't move freely, then that'll be like a hang-up on your flippers, and we don't want any hang-ups on our flippers. Okay. Then I beat the roll pins back in, and this is why I don't want to remove them, because it's really hard to get the roll pin in that tiny little hole. Hey, I forgot to mention. You see this arrow here? That's there for a reason. I did that with the Sharpie, and that's because you could install these things backwards. I don't recommend it, because then when you put them back together, it really confuses you. So that means I could have flipped this thing around so that it was going this way, but because I put this handy arrow on this paw assembly, that way I don't fuck that up and cause myself issues. So there I am beating it with a hammer. Everybody likes to hit things with a hammer, and this is good reason to do it. Okay, now I put it all back together. See, there's my arrow again. Okay, so I put this guy in. I put the flipper shaft through, and then I can loosely tighten up the 2 little adjuster screws. Then I put my coil in and my coil stop in place. And then this thing I bought at Sears, it's like this nifty little tool that you can put it like a slot head screw on here, and it'll hold it in place. It makes it a lot easier to put a screw in because you got to put these 2 little screws in, and my fingers are too big. So this tool really helps with that, and it's got a magnet on the end too. This is like $5. It's well worth the money. The only downside to this is if the top of the screw, the slot is kind of fucked up, it won't hold it very well. But anyways, you can see this coil I put in here. If anybody knows about coil numbers, this is a Williams coil number, and this is a Williams coil. Now, why would I be using a Williams coil in a Gottlieb game? Well, the reason is because I like really strong flippers. I'm a whore when it comes to strong flippers. I like girls with big tits, and I like really strong flippers. Okay, I'm just like the normal male. And I like V8s, too. So the reason why I use this Williams, Steve Young sells this thing called Yellow Dots, A5141 coil Yellow Dots. And they're like a stronger version of the Gottlieb coil. The problem is that they're too strong. I mean, there's a point, I'm not, I don't want to totally tear up my game. I like strong flippers, but I don't want them to be over strong. And if you got the game on high tap, you got all these new parts in, and you don't have any play in the system. If you put Yellow Dots in, you literally are knocking the ball through the glass. They're just way too strong. So there's a compromise, and that's these things I call them orange dots, though they don't have an orange dot on them. I keep telling them they're going to be orange dots because Steve Young, that fucker, keeps telling me he's going to wind them for me on Gottlieb frames and call them orange dots, but he's yet to do it. He's been going on a year about it. But anyways, The reason why I like these is it just gives you a little more power without it being excessive. It's a nice compromise between gas mileage and V8 power, if you want to look at it that way. So, but the downside is William coil frames are a 1/16 of an inch longer than Gottlieb. So that means that this length right here is a 1/16 of an inch longer on a Williams coil. But that's easy to deal with. You just undo these guys, these screws right here for the top bracket. You loosen these guys up and they're slotted. And then you tighten up these guys, and then you can push these down and take all the adjustment out, and it'll basically allow you to use a Williams coil in there. Now note that I don't have the wires switched over yet, because I'm a real idiot when it comes to soldering wires. I only solder one at a time, so I take one off from here, and I put it over on that far one over there, and then I take the middle one here, and then I move it over to the middle one on this one. If I don't do it all at once, because if I did it all at once, I'd sure as fuck screw it up! So I don't want to do that. I don't want to fix stuff that I broke, so that's why I do it like that. Then I check the EOS switch, so basically, I pull down on right here. Notice I'm not pulling down here. I'm pulling down at the top of the plunger, because if there is any play in here, it'll telegraph through to my EOS switch, which is what I want, because I want to kind of get an accurate look at this EOS switch. Normally it's closed when this is fully plunged all the way down at end of stroke. This guy should open about 1/8 of an inch. The other thing I do, purists are going to hate this, but you see these brackets right here? You see it rest? The fiber link rests against this L bracket. Okay, so I take the screws out of here, and it's got like these adjustments so that you can move the thing up and down maybe 1/4 of an inch. I move it all the way up, okay? And what this does is it gives me wild ass flipper angle here. Because normally on a Gottlieb, you see this angle here, I don't know how many degrees that is in the V. Like if you look at that as a V, okay, or no, okay, look at this as girls' legs. Okay, so here she's nice, and I like a nice spread here, okay? The problem is that you don't want a whore. When it's in the original Gottlieb, this guy is only coming down about like this, which means her legs are really spread. I want her to not cross them, but I want it to come up more. This way I can dead catch the ball easier, because I'm a really shitty pinball player. So I can catch the ball easier, I can line up my shots better. Because it gives me a little bit more travel, it actually makes the flippers just a kind of hair stronger. So it's nice. I really like it. But when I'm in the resting position, you see this line through here? You see how everything lines up? So I'm using this as a straight edge. And this is parallel, this line to this ball guide. And this line is parallel to the flippers. So that's what I want. They may not have been that way all their life. But in my opinion, when the ball rolls off of this, it should roll nice and smooth. And it should be, all the shots should line up nice like that. And then I got my good flipper angle, and I do that because I fuck with that bracket. Gary says I have 5 more minutes. That's good, we're almost done. Okay, see we're at slide 57. Okay, so hey, we are all done. Thanks, Gary. So now what I do is I take the game and I play it. Now you notice I still haven't done those goddamn score reels. And there's a real reason I haven't done those score reels. Because now that I got the game running, okay, it's working, I start a game, okay? And when I start a game, what I do is I go to the player unit in the back, and I manually press in the 10, 100, and 1,000 point relays manually, and I can watch the score reels move, okay? Then I take the player unit and I manually advance it 1, and then I can do the same thing with the second player. Push in those relays and watch them advance and watch them move. And then I could do it with the third player, and I could do it with the fourth. And if any of them are sluggish or don't advance, or maybe there's no rollover, like when you get to the 9, it doesn't advance the next one, I know that I got a problem. And then I fix it, okay? Because I got better things to do, obviously, than to fix fucking 16 score rails, you know? So I mean, there's more things in life. And, you know, that's what I do with the score reels. I do them dead last and only if I have to do them. And then, you know, you can clean the things if you really have got, you know, hell to go through and take all the black off. I just don't like to fuck with score reels. They're just a lot of trouble. So, but that's it. Okay, we're all done. Anybody got any questions? Yes, sir.
Can you make these slides available?
They are available. You just saw them. No, they won't be available. This is just for the show. I've been working, you know, somebody asked me, The guys that did the show said, we got you going on at 10:30 in the morning. And I said, I can't do 10:30. And they said, well, why? And I lied to them. I said, I'm not going to be here at 10:30. I'm still going to be flying over. And the reason why I told them that is because I've been working on this for like a week to get these all ready. And back to your question about availability, it's a treat just for people that actually sit through all this boring crap to see them, that if I put them on the website, I think it negates the specialness of the Northwest Pinball Show. That's a really shitty answer to your question, wasn't it? But hey, that's what I'm going with. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
The Williams coil that you used, what era or what series?
Say again. I'm sorry. The what?
The Williams coils.
Oh, the Williams coils.
What range of years can you use that Williams coil mod?
Well, I use them on all the Gottlieb EMs. I would say the only thing I don't use them on, if I could get there, I don't think I can. The only thing I don't really use them on is 2-inch flipper games. 2-inch flipper games I put yellow dots in. But 3-inch flipper games I put these what I call orange dots. So if it's got 3-inch flippers, I put them in. That era of Williams coil, which is a 21-375, that's the power side, is a 70s Williams EM flipper coil. It's not their most powerful, but it's a 70s style, Williams flipper coil.
What was the 2-inch flipper coil?
I use what's known as the yellow dot A-5141. Steve Young calls them yellow dots. Basically what it is that yellow dots, the power side is 1 ohm of resistance on the power side of a flipper coil is 2 coils built into one. So you've got the power side that initially kicks it, and then as the end of stroke switch opens up, then you get a hold side, which is then in series with the power side, so you get a total of, 10 or 12 ohms of resistance. So the power side is 1 ohm on a yellow dot. On a standard Gottlieb coil, it's 2 ohms, and on these orange dots, it's 1.5 ohms, right in the middle. It's nice how all those numbers work out. It's really cool. But anyway, so I've been trying to get Steve Young to make these orange dots, and he hasn't done it yet. He keeps saying he's backed up because he winds all his own coils. He's got a coil winder, and apparently has way too much time on his hand to learn how to use that crap. So he hasn't actually started making them, but if you guys all bother him, I bet he will, because so far I'm the only one bothering him. But anyways, any other questions? Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, on the few Gottlieb games I've worked on so far, I've found that the coils on the bumpers are a real bitch to get the sleeves on. Is that typical?
You're talking about on the pop bumpers or the sleeve? He says the coil sleeves are really bitch to get out of the coils.
Those red 4893s, I think, on the pop bumpers.
On the pop bumpers?
Typical?
No. I think on that particular game that they literally fell out when I pulled them out. No, it usually means that the coil's been heat stressed for whatever reason. So generally, if I can't get a sleeve out, I chuck the coil and just put a new one in, and then that way I get a new sleeve too. I know that's kind of it seems ridiculous, but you can check the resistance of the coils too, and just check to see if they've been heat stressed, because as a coil heats up, what it does is it burns the enamel paint that's on the copper wire, and the enamel paint is the insulation. So if you think about it, you got this big hunk of wire, and all the things are touching. Well, they're not touching because the wires are actually painted with enamel. That red is enamel paint. Well, what happens is if that coil locks on, it heats up, and then the enamel paint burns off. Okay, then you get 2 contacts coming together, 2 windings coming together, which lowers the resistance of the coil, which makes it more powerful, which makes it hotter, which burns more of the enamel off the coil, which then makes more of them short, and eventually you end up with a dead short, and it's blowing fuses or it just melts. So it's kind of a progressive thing. But anyways, yeah, if you can't remove the sleeves, I would say you're in for a new coil, because it's probably on the way out anyways. You had a question. Do we have new DVDs coming out? Yes. The problem with the DVDs is that they are just an unbelievable amount of work. If I spend a week on this, I'll spend a week on 5 minutes of the video. They're an incredible time suck. I can't believe that we've done as many as we've done, to be honest with you, because they're just like, I put my life on complete hold to do the videos. And what happens is a lot of stuff gets stuck in front of it that is, quote, more important, like coming to the show and doing this kind of stuff, doing the Pin Game Journal, doing the website, doing X, Y, and Z, getting games restored for myself. So it's real easy to push the videos back. It's an unfortunate thing, and I believe me, I really regret it, but it's just kind of how it works.
Are there any DVDs available at the show?
No, there is nobody selling DVDs here. You'd have to email me, and I could send you them. Or you can give money to the Pinball Hall of Fame, and he'll send you some too. Either Tim Arnold or myself. If you just email him and tell him what you want, we can send them to you. So they're easy to get, but they're just not. There's nobody here selling them. I wish that we could get more videos out. I have 2 videos that are almost done, but it's just like Shelberg in the Pin Game Journal when he says something's almost done. It keeps on going on forever and forever and ever.
What are the 2 that are in the pipeline?
Well, the one that's close to being completed is the Bally solid state one, and that's probably, I really hope that, to be honest with you, after this game, you could see, look where that game is. This is interesting. Look at that floor. That is like a nice tile floor. That's my front door. That's a coat closet. That game is in my fucking foyer. Do you know how much shit I take for that? Okay, so like right now, so I don't get divorced, that game needs to get out of my foyer. I've been working on it on the foyer for like 2 weeks now, and every day my wife walks past it when she gets up to go to work, and when she comes home from work, and when she goes into the kitchen, or comes out of the kitchen, or pretty much goes anywhere. She walks right by that thing and gives me nothing but shit about it. So my first priority right now is to get this finished up. What I'm doing with these multiplayer games is I am operating them. I have put them in just a little video store and on Quarter Play, and they're doing great. People love to play this crap. And I mean, the other thing I do is I touch up the playfield, I clear coat them. I put all new parts on the top of the playfield, all new drop targets because I break them all. And and people put quarters in them. And I'm growing rich by operating EM games. Rich, dirty rich. I think the last game I made $3 in a week.
So thank you for that, Clay. I wish we had more time to hear from you.
Oh yeah, we've got more.
Thanks for showing us how, I guess, the Clay style of a PowerPoint presentation. So once again, thanks very much. And all the best.